TM 55203 Maintenance of Railway Car Chapter 6 Draft Gear 6.1 General. It is noted in paragraph 316 the draft gears and car mechanism which connect the couplers to the underframe of the train purposes of absorb shock and coupling of the train movement. Various kinds of draft gears have been developed, but the Army-owned rolling stock is generally equipped with a friction type illustrated in the 6.1. Draft gears are owned by the DFRIF, Defensive Railway Interchange Fleet. Cars in Kaunas are usually in Cardwell, Minor, National, or Westinghouse Springs and/or friction types. However, some are newer than the Defense Freight Railway Interchange Fleet. Can be equipped within the shock-resistant rubber cushion draft gears may be one of the various commercial manufacturers. These drafters gears are discussed in paragraph 6.3. The yoke followers are attachment and complete drafts and general gear installation. Some cars, particularly overseas types, may be equipped in each springs with friction type buffers to provide cushion against the shock. The travel must be not less than 2.5 inches and not more than 2 3/4 of an inch. As the draft gear followers must be at least 2 1/4 of an inch thick. In most draft gears, the friction surfaces are only elements subject to wear. A disassembled draft gear and a yoke are shown in figures 2. Friction type. General, a draft gear must create a low and initial resistant compression of the draft gear and strings that were possible to permit and slack and tacking up and trains started smoothly in one card at a time from this point on. An increasingly high resistance must be created to prevent the closure from coming too soon. Although the coupler pull is decreased rapidly and powerful recoil must now accompany and release of gear. Low initial resistance followed by increasing resistance is obtained, arranging them each spring and so that one end of the end butts into again friction bump member of the gear when springs may compress and pressure for the friction elements are relatively resistant. So the compression of the springs will be the lowest. As the compression steadily increases, thus the friction devices increases. As a result, resistance to completion, closing the springs progressively to pull the coupler increases up upon release of the gear. The friction elements that causes the spring to expand and gradually prevent the strong recoil. Regulations include testing requirements for the friction type gears covering the minimum exterior dimension, restriction of the travel of the gear, and limits of minimum closed length of the gear under the specific load conditions. B. The components. All approved friction draft gears consist of two major components: a coil spring and a friction unassembled with a single housing. The coiled spring unit usually composed of a nest of coil springs fitted within the housing. Frictional elliptical springs or friction segments of steel block and plates seated into a grooved wedge. Whether the friction unit may have the action that will be similar as the cooler springs begin and compress, they may resist a fixed friction unit. As the forces of the spring increase, they compress. They further the friction on units of other resistance. The combined action of the unit contributes to the smooth starting of a car. The recoil of the spring diminishes when under the pull is relieved. Any slight vibration of the full recoil prevented before bearing are being transmitted to the car. The performance of the friction of the coil spring using the similar within the gear suddenly push the rear rather to the pull and briefly friction type of the draft gear, eliminating the spring recoil, ensuring the smoother start of the car. Whether the force of the coupling, whether it be puller buff is removed, there is no violent action to recoil that there would be simply spring gear. The simple coiled spring draft gear. 6.3 Cushion rubber type gear. A multi-pad 2-put cushion 2 rubber draft gear has been developed and set in standards for use of both freight and passenger. Here's 6.1 typical friction draft gears. You have your cylindrical, a larger one with rubber pads, and then something else. Cars. These twin cushions are designed to fit in the standard freight car passengers draft gears, and none of these draft gears are currently with the Army-owned rolling stock and are nearly found in the Defensive Freight Rolling RIF. Cars especially designed to reduce shock and movement and sensitive materials. 64 replacement procedures. A. General. For defective draft gear attachments must be renewed, and defective splicing, patching unauthorized except for emergency measures and because the failure to draft attachments can result in considerable damages to the car and landing. Except for the center seals and drafting casting parts of the drafting gear and must be normalized after any parts of the welding. Disassembly. To disassemble the draft gear arrangement of the coupler to be removed from the yoke using the procedure described in 7.5 F1 through 8. The yoke draft gear assembly may then drop into one of several ways. A. The choke of the car wheels may opposite end of the end of being worked. Remove the uncoupler, level draft key, and coupler, etc. B. Disconnect the brake rod to the truck and to the top of the lever jack up the end of the car and roll the truck out of the way. Place the jack on hydraulic under the yoke. B. The hydro ram of the steel wedge and compression draft gear and follower block it. Remove the carrier and iron bolts. F. Lower the draft gear yoke assembly for the pocket. 2. Whether the type of car drafting gear facilities is not necessary to remove the truck from the other car. In many cases, the drafting gear removed the following step: A, C, D, E, F, above only. 3. When the hydraulics, jacks, and lifts are not available, the truck jacks may be used in field expedition as follows: remove uncoupling lever, etc. 1A above but leave the draft key in place. B. Compress the fowler away from the lugs 1D and above. C. Place 2 inches by 10 inch oak or other heavy board under the drafting gear with one end of the resting axle and the nearest wheel one end of the ground. Here you see a drafting gear took apart. You got your raise the outside end of the board to maximum possible height of the place a suitable size track jack other than the jack with project foot under the end of the board. E. The place a suitable sizable wooden block of the board directly under the yoke. Jack up the board and to take the weight of the drafting gear. F. Remove the draft key side of the coupler into is pocketed. Remove the carrier iron bolts if necessary. Lower the draft gear's yoke assembly ground. Note: as draft gear attachment may have a weight of over 60 pounds, a low-weighted service truck with a hydraulic pneumatic jack should be used available. C. Reinstallation. Reinstallation of a draft gear is largely a reversal of the procedures to remove it. To reinstall a draft gear, follower's yoke compressed with the gear approximately 1/2 inch, driving a steel wedge between the follower and the yoke. This permits that these parts are lifted in proper places in draft gear pocket without difficulty. The wedge must be removed after the gear is hooked up. If the spaces between the wedges cannot be conveniently taken out after the gears are at the same place of the hard shot, it would be inserted in place of the wedge. The draft gear is compressed at all swivel pins and draft keys, carrier irons, and retainers must be protected against the loss of bolts and cotter pins. And after the gear coupler attachments of the place and bolts and cotter pins will be placed in holes and provided. Cotter pins will be opened wide and bolts and pinied over the preventing nuts from working off. 6.5 Maintenance. Establish regulations of the Association of Railroads AAR and the Department of Transportation of the maintenance inspection of the freight passenger cars and contained within current Association of American Railroads interchange rules and mandatory interchange services on the railroad of the United States. All that it is not mandatory for that all personnel concerned with this maintenance of a railway freight passenger cars and oversee and comply strictly with these regulations is recommended that they use be particularly from the safety viewpoint. 6.6 Draft gear and oversee equipment decision of the drafting gear paragraph 6.1 through 6.3 applicable for railroad equipment continental United States, Canada, Mexico. The draft gear described in these countries is designed to take both of the draft and shock, both believed to take both buff and draft shock over the seas, and believed to strategically implemented only to China and Korea have equipment where there is adaptable. It is in most other areas only Polo to observe the draft gear and buff observed inside buffers and set approximately 35 inches to the end of the center line of the draft gear. The hook link in the cup, the European partner, and the witness line coupler of the Russian partner pattern are example of the latter type. See figure 7.5 and 7.9. Chapter 7 Couplers.